eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
Sometimes a story hits the internet that's so dark, so unsettling, that people don't even know whether to believe it or block it out. And right now, one of those stories is spreading fast, pulling in names like Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey into a narrative that's got millions of people asking the same question. What is really going on behind the scenes in Hollywood? Because this isn't just another celebrity rumor or tabloid headline. This is being framed online as something much bigger, something connected to long-standing whispers about power, influence, and secrecy at the highest levels of the entertainment industry. And the reason it's blowing up right now is because people are starting to revisit old interviews, past statements, and unexplained connections, trying to piece together a story that, according to many online, has been hidden in plain sight for years. Ever since the case of Jeffrey Epstein exposed how deep certain networks can go, the public has been more alert than ever. And now, every new claim, whether proven or not, spreads like wildfire, especially when it involves major public figures. And that's exactly what's happening here, because the internet is full of videos, threads, and discussions suggesting that there might be more to certain celebrity circles than what we see on TV, more than what's reported in mainstream media. And while none of these claims have been officially confirmed, the way they're being presented, confident, detailed, and emotionally charged, is making people stop, watch, and question everything they thought they knew. So the real question isn't just what's being said, it's why so many people are paying attention now, why this story keeps resurfacing, and whether there's any truth behind the noise, or if this is just another example of how the internet can turn speculation into something that feels like reality. And that's exactly what we're about to break down. Hashtag Hollywood Secrets, hashtag Corey Feldman, hashtag Ellen DeGeneres, hashtag Oprah Winfrey, hashtag Epstein, hashtag viral news, hashtag trending now, at Corey Feldman, at Ellen DeGeneres, at Oprah, at breaking news, at YouTube, trending. To really understand why this story is getting so much attention right now, you have to go back and look at where it all started. And at the center of that conversation for years has been Corey Feldman, a former child star who was once one of the biggest names in Hollywood during the 80s, starring in iconic films and living what looked like a dream life from the outside. But behind that success, he's been very vocal about something much darker, something he claims has existed in the entertainment industry for decades, and that's the issue of abuse and exploitation involving young actors. And for a long time, when he tried to speak about it publicly, most people didn't take him seriously. They brushed it off as exaggeration or attention-seeking. But over the years, as more stories started coming out from different parts of the industry, people slowly began to revisit what he had been saying. And that's where things started to shift, because suddenly, his warnings didn't sound as unbelievable as they once did. Now add to that the global impact of the Jeffrey Epstein case, which exposed how powerful individuals could be connected within hidden networks, and it changed the way the public looks at elite circles forever, making people more suspicious, more curious, and more willing to question what's happening behind closed doors. And once that mindset took hold, it created the perfect environment for new theories, new claims, and new narratives to spread quickly, especially when they involve well-known public figures like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey, because both of them have built massive influence over decades. And when names like that get pulled into any kind of viral discussion, it instantly amplifies the attention, whether the claims are verified or not. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, because this story isn't coming from one single source. It's being built piece by piece across social media, interviews, old clips, and speculation, all merging into one narrative that feels bigger than any one claim. And that's why people are watching so closely, because when you combine past allegations, high-profile names, and an already suspicious public mindset, you get a story that spreads fast and sticks even faster. Now, here's where things really start to take off, because this story didn't just randomly appear out of nowhere. It slowly built momentum and then suddenly exploded. and the turning point came when clips, interviews, and statements involving Corey Feldman started resurfacing across platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and X, Twitter, where users began stitching together different pieces of content, old interviews, podcast appearances, and past documentaries, into one continuous narrative. And once that happened, the story transformed from something niche into something mainstream. Because now it wasn't just about what Feldman had said years ago. It was about how those statements could be interpreted today, especially in a post-Jeffrey Epstein era where people are already more aware of how powerful networks can operate behind closed doors. And once that connection was made, the algorithm did the rest, pushing the content to millions of viewers who were already primed to be curious, skeptical, and engaged. At the same time, certain viral creators began adding their own commentary, framing the story in a way that made it feel like a hidden truth finally coming to light. And that's when names like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey started getting pulled into the conversation more aggressively, not necessarily through confirmed evidence, but through association, speculation, and the power of storytelling. Because once a narrative suggests that multiple high-profile individuals could be connected, it immediately raises the stakes, making people feel like they're witnessing something bigger than just a single allegation. And that emotional intensity is what drives shares, comments, and engagement, turning the story into a full-blown viral phenomenon. And the more it spreads, the more versions of the story appear, each one slightly different, each one adding new layers, and each one making the overall narrative feel more complete, even if the core facts haven't changed. And that's how this controversy went from scattered claims to one of the most talked about topics online, fueled not just by information, but by the way that information was packaged, repeated, and amplified across the internet. And this is where the story becomes even more intense, because once people start believing there's something deeper going on, they begin looking for patterns. And when the internet starts looking for patterns, it almost always finds them, whether they're actually connected or not. And that's exactly what's happening here, because users across social media have started linking together different events, different people, and different moments involving Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey, trying to build a bigger picture out of smaller separate pieces, and suddenly, things that were never originally connected are being placed side by side, creating a narrative that feels intentional, almost like everything was part of a larger system all along. And this idea becomes even stronger when people bring up how, over the years, multiple controversies, accusations, and scandals have surfaced in Hollywood involving powerful figures, which then gets tied back to the case of Jeffrey Epstein, making it seem like there's a repeating cycle or structure that exists behind the scenes. And once that belief takes hold, every new piece of content, whether it's an old clip, a resurfaced quote, or even body language in an interview, starts to feel like evidence, like another clue that confirms what people already suspect. And that's the psychological shift that turns curiosity into conviction. Because now viewers aren't just watching the story, they're participating in it, analyzing it, and reinforcing it in their own minds. And the more people do that, the stronger the narrative becomes, even if the connections being made are based more on interpretation than on verified facts. And that's why this story feels so powerful right now. Because it's not just being told by one source, it's being built collectively by thousands of people online, each one adding their own perspective, their own theory, and their own version of how everything might be connected, turning it into something that feels much bigger than any single claim or piece of information. And this is the exact point where the story stops being just a theory and starts feeling like something real. Because once the internet introduces the idea of insiders, everything changes instantly. And that's exactly what pushed this narrative into overdrive. Because now it wasn't just random users connecting dots anymore. It was being framed as information coming from people close to the situation, people who allegedly know what really happened. And even though none of these sources were publicly verified, The way the story was presented made it feel exclusive, like hidden knowledge finally leaking out. And that psychological shift is incredibly powerful, because the moment people believe they're getting access to insider information, they stop questioning as much and start believing more, especially when the names involved are as recognizable as Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey. Because these are figures who have spent decades building influence, trust, and public personas. And when those personas are suddenly challenged by claims that suggest something hidden behind the scenes, it creates a massive emotional reaction, curiosity mixed with disbelief. And that's exactly what drives engagement, because people aren't just watching anymore. They're reacting, debating, arguing, and sharing. And as more creators pick up the story and add their own spin, their own tone, and their own dramatic framing, the narrative becomes louder, more intense, and more convincing, even if the actual evidence hasn't changed at all. And that's how viral storytelling works at its highest level. It doesn't rely on new facts. It relies on new angles, new emotions, and new ways of presenting the same idea, until it reaches a point where it feels like something that must be true simply because of how widely it's being talked about. And that's exactly where this story is right now. Right at the peak of attention, where belief and curiosity are blending together, making it one of the most discussed and debated narratives online. And this is where things cross a line that most people don't even notice, because at this stage, the story is no longer just something people are watching. It becomes something people believe, and that shift happens quietly, almost automatically, because when you see the same claims repeated over and over again across different platforms, different videos, and different creators, your brain starts to register it as familiar. And familiarity often gets mistaken for truth, and that's exactly what's happening here. Because the more this narrative spreads involving Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey, the more it starts to feel like something that's already been confirmed, even though no official confirmation exists. And that's the power of repetition in the digital age, because once a story reaches enough people, it creates its own momentum, its own version of reality that lives independently from verified facts. And at that point, every new piece of content doesn't need to prove anything new. It just needs to reinforce what people already think they know, and that reinforcement keeps the cycle going, making the story bigger, louder, and more difficult to question. And what makes this even more intense is the emotional layer attached to it, because when a narrative involves serious themes, power, secrecy, and hidden systems, it naturally triggers strong reactions, which makes people more likely to engage with it, share it, and defend it, even without concrete evidence. And that's how a viral story evolves into something much more powerful than just a rumor. It becomes a widely accepted narrative in the eyes of the public, shaping opinions and conversations in real time, even as the actual facts remain unchanged in the background. And if you're wondering why this story is hitting so hard right now, why millions of people are not just watching it but actually believing parts of it, the answer goes deeper than just the claims themselves. It's about timing, psychology, and everything that's already happened before. Because after cases like Jeffrey Epstein shook public trust, people started realizing that not everything happening at the top levels of power is visible to the public. And once that door opened, it changed how audiences process new information, especially when it involves celebrities, influence, and secrecy. So now when a narrative like this appears involving names like Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey, people don't immediately dismiss it the way they might have years ago. Instead, they lean in, they listen, and they start connecting it to everything they've already seen or heard. And that's what makes it feel believable, because it's not coming into a vacuum. It's building on an existing mindset where audiences are already questioning authority, already skeptical of institutions, and already curious about what might be happening behind closed doors. And when you combine that with the emotional intensity of the way these stories are told, dramatic music, confident narration, selective clips, it creates an experience that feels convincing on a deeper level. not just logically but emotionally. And once emotion is involved, belief becomes much stronger, because people aren't just evaluating facts anymore. They're reacting to how the story makes them feel. And that emotional connection is what drives engagement, shares, and discussions, turning a single narrative into a widespread conversation that keeps growing, evolving, and pulling more people in, even if the core evidence hasn't actually changed. And now we reach the part that most viral videos either rush through or completely ignore, because this is where you have to separate what's actually confirmed from what's simply being claimed online. And once you slow things down and really look at it, the difference becomes clear, because while it is absolutely true that Jeffrey Epstein was involved in a real documented criminal case that exposed serious issues involving powerful individuals, there is no publicly verified evidence that supports the extreme claims being attached to Ellen DeGeneres or Oprah Winfrey in the way these viral narratives suggest. And that distinction is critical, because the internet often blurs the line between association and involvement, making it seem like being mentioned in broader discussions or appearing in unrelated contexts is the same as being directly connected to wrongdoing, when in reality, those are completely different things. And this is where a lot of people get pulled deeper into the story, because once you've already accepted part of the narrative, it becomes easier to accept the rest without questioning it as much, especially when it's presented in a confident, detailed, and emotionally charged way. And that's exactly how these stories maintain their momentum, because they don't just rely on facts, they rely on presentation, repetition, and the natural human tendency to fill in gaps with assumptions. And while there are still unanswered questions in many high-profile cases, those unanswered questions should not automatically be treated as proof of new claims, because doing that turns speculation into something that feels like certainty, even when it hasn't been verified. And understanding that difference is what allows you to step back from the noise and actually evaluate what's real, what's possible, and what's simply part of a viral narrative that has grown beyond the evidence it started with. And here's something most people don't even realize while they're watching all of this unfold. Stories like this don't actually disappear. They just evolve. Because once a narrative like this enters the internet, it never truly goes away. It just fades for a while and then comes back stronger, more detailed, and more intense than before. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Because this conversation involving Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey isn't brand new. It's a resurfacing of ideas, clips, and theories that have been circulating for years. But now they're being presented in a way that feels more connected, more organized, and more believable to a modern audience that's already more skeptical than ever before. And that's the key difference, because years ago, these kinds of claims might have been dismissed quickly. But today, after everything that's come out about powerful networks and hidden connections, people are more willing to pause and consider the possibility, even if they don't fully believe it. And that openness is what keeps the story alive, because every time it comes back, it picks up new viewers, new reactions, and new interpretations, and each version adds another layer, another angle, another piece to the puzzle, making it feel like something that's constantly growing even when the core information hasn't actually changed. And that's the cycle of viral narratives in the digital age. They don't rely on new facts to survive. They rely on renewed attention. And as long as people are curious, questioning, and willing to engage, stories like this will keep coming back, reshaping themselves each time and pulling more people into the conversation with every new wave. And now we get to the part that really matters. Because beyond the views, beyond the shares, and beyond the viral headlines, stories like this have a real impact on how people think, how they see the world, and how they judge others. And that's something that often gets overlooked in the middle of all the noise, because when a narrative like this spreads involving names like Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey, it doesn't just stay online as entertainment. It starts shaping real opinions, real conversations, and real perceptions. And the more it spreads, the more it becomes something people reference in everyday discussions, something they assume others already know or believe, even if it was never actually confirmed. And that's where things can get complicated. Because once a story reaches that level, it becomes very difficult to separate fact from assumption, especially for people who are encountering it for the first time without full context. And at that point, the narrative itself becomes more powerful than the evidence behind it, because it's supported by repetition, emotion, and collective belief. And that combination can influence how millions of people view not just the individuals involved, but the entire industry around them, creating a sense of distrust that extends far beyond the original claims. And while questioning and curiosity are important, they also need to be balanced with critical thinking. Because without that balance, it becomes easy to accept something simply because it's popular, not because it's proven. And that's the line that stories like this walk every single day, between raising awareness and creating assumptions. And understanding that difference is what allows you to stay informed without being pulled too far into narratives that may not be fully supported by evidence. So, after everything we've just gone through, the viral clips, the resurfaced interviews, the way names like Corey Feldman, Ellen DeGeneres, and Oprah Winfrey keep getting pulled into the same conversation, and the way this entire narrative has spread across the internet, you're left with one powerful question that hits harder than anything else. Are you watching facts unfold? Or are you watching a story being built in real time, piece by piece, until it feels like truth? Because that's exactly how modern viral storytelling works. It doesn't always rely on new evidence. It relies on attention, repetition, and emotion. And once those three elements come together, a narrative can grow faster than the facts can catch up. And that's why this story continues to trend, continues to resurface, and continues to pull in millions of viewers who are all trying to figure out what's really going on behind the scenes, and whether there's something deeper that hasn't fully come to light yet, or whether this is simply another example of how powerful the internet can be when it comes to shaping perception. Now the choice is yours. After hearing everything, after seeing how this story evolved and why it spread the way it did, what do you actually believe? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those conversations where every opinion matters. And if you want more deep breakdowns like this where we go beyond the headlines and actually unpack what's trending online, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even bigger, even more intense, and even more impossible to ignore. So now it's your turn. After hearing everything about Corey Feldman, the way this story pulled in names like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey, and how this entire narrative exploded across the internet, what do you actually think is going on here? Is this just another viral story that got out of control? Or is there something deeper that people are trying to figure out piece by piece? Drop your opinion in the comments right now, because this is one of those conversations where everyone sees it differently, and I want to know exactly where you stand on it. And if you made it this far, don't just watch. Be part of the conversation, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we're breaking down stories that nobody else is explaining this clearly, and trust me, the next one is going to be even bigger, even more intense, and something you don't want to miss.